The courtroom was quiet, save for the rhythmic tapping of Judge Margaret Holloway's pen against the polished oak desk. Her sharp eyes scanned the room with an air of authority that made even seasoned lawyers uneasy. Today, however, her focus rested on someone far less intimidating, a teenage boy standing awkwardly in the defendant's chair. 17-year-old Ethan Carter looked out of place amidst the formal suits and stern faces filling the courthouse. His faded hoodie hung loosely over his slim frame, and his sneakers were scuffed from years of wear. To most people present, he seemed like just another troubled kid caught up in something bigger than himself. Ethan had been accused of vandalism after being spotted spray painting cryptic symbols on the side of the town's beloved public library late one night. The incident had caused quite a stir among residents, many of whom viewed the act as disrespectful and unnecessary. When questioned by police officers at the scene, Ethan simply shrugged and muttered, "It's not graffiti, it's proof." No one understood what he meant, least of all the judge now presiding over his case. Judge Holloway leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable but clearly unimpressed. She adjusted her glasses before addressing the young man directly. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice firm yet tinged with impatience, "do you have anything to say for yourself?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably under her gaze but remained silent. He didn't seem nervous so much as calculating, as if carefully choosing his words before speaking. After a moment, he replied softly, "Your Honor, I think you'll understand everything eventually." This vague response only served to irritate Judge Holloway further. "Understand what exactly?" she snapped, leaning back in her seat. "Are we supposed to believe this is some kind of artistic masterpiece? Because it looks more like reckless behavior to me." A faint smirk played on Ethan's lips, though he quickly hid it behind a neutral expression. If anyone noticed the fleeting reaction, they dismissed it as typical teenage arrogance. But there was something deeper beneath the surface, something no one could see. Unbeknownst to those gathered in the courtroom, Ethan wasn't your average high school student. In fact, he was far from ordinary. At just 17, Ethan possessed a mind sharper than most adults twice his age, a child prodigy who excelled in mathematics, physics, and law. He had already completed an advanced online legal program under a pseudonym. By day, he blended into the background of his small suburban life. By night, he worked discreetly as a consultant for complex cases, offering insights that baffled even experienced attorneys. Yet none of this was known to Judge Holloway or anyone else watching him stand trial today. As the proceedings continued, whispers spread throughout the gallery. Some spectators shook their heads sympathetically, assuming Ethan would walk away with little more than a slap on the wrist. Others snickered quietly, amused by the absurdity of seeing such a young person defend himself against serious charges. Meanwhile, Ethan stood silently, observing every detail: the prosecutor's body language, the jurors' reactions, even the way Judge Holloway tapped her pen whenever she grew frustrated. When the prosecutor, Mr. Grayson, took the floor to present evidence, Ethan listened intently without betraying any emotion. Security footage showed him spray painting equations onto the library wall, while witness testimonies described him lingering suspiciously near the building earlier that evening. Each piece of evidence painted him as guilty beyond doubt. Still, Ethan remained calm, occasionally jotting notes on a crumpled piece of paper. Finally, Judge Holloway turned her attention back to him. "Well, Mr. Carter?" she asked pointedly, raising an eyebrow. "Do you plan to explain why you decided to deface public property? Or should we assume you're simply too immature to comprehend the consequences of your actions?" For a brief moment, Ethan locked eyes with her, his piercing gaze hinting at a wisdom far beyond his years. Then, without saying a word, he returned to his note-taking, leaving the courtroom buzzing with anticipation, and a growing sense that perhaps this teenager wasn't quite as ordinary as he appeared. Little did anyone know, the real drama was only beginning. The prosecutor, Mr. Grayson, rose from his seat with an air of confidence that filled the courtroom. A tall man in his late 40s with neatly combed gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor, he carried himself like someone who had seen it all before. To him, Ethan Carter was just another rebellious teenager making poor choices, a case he could close effortlessly. As he adjusted his tie and cleared his throat, the room fell silent, everyone bracing themselves for what would come next. "Your Honor," Mr. Grayson began, addressing Judge Holloway with a respectful nod. "The facts of this case are clear and undeniable. The defendant, Ethan Carter, stands accused of malicious vandalism, an act not only disrespectful to our community, but also illegal under state law." He paused dramatically, letting his words sink in as he turned to face the jury. "This is not some harmless prank or youthful indiscretion. This is destruction." He then gestured toward the large screen mounted on the wall behind him. With a click of a remote, grainy security footage flickered to life. It showed Ethan standing in front of the library late at night, spray can in hand, methodically painting symbols onto the pristine brick wall. Though the video lacked audio, the images spoke volumes. Ethan's movements were deliberate, almost calculated, which made the act seem even more premeditated. "This isn't random graffiti," Mr. Grayson continued, pointing at the screen. "It's intentional defacement of public property. And let me remind you, ladies and gentlemen, that this library serves hundreds of families every week. It's a place where children learn, where people gather to read and grow. Yet instead of respecting this institution, the defendant chose to mar its walls with his so-called art." Ethan listened silently, his expression unreadable. While others might have squirmed under such accusations, he remained perfectly still, occasionally, glancing at the footage as if analyzing it, rather than defending against it. His calmness unnerved some in the gallery, while others mistook it for indifference. To bolster his case, Mr. Grayson called 2 witnesses to testify. The first was Mrs. Anderson, a librarian who claimed she had noticed Ethan lingering around the building earlier that evening. "He looked suspicious," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought maybe he was lost or needed help, but when I approached him, he walked away quickly." The second witness was a local shopkeeper named Mr. Patel. "I saw him near my store too," Mr. Patel stated confidently. "He kept looking over his shoulder like he didn't want anyone to notice him. Honestly, Your Honor, I wasn't surprised to hear about what happened later." Each testimony painted Ethan as guilty, reinforcing the narrative that he was up to no good. Yet something about the entire presentation felt off. Ethan's occasional nods and scribbles suggested he wasn't paying attention, but those who watched closely noticed a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips, a subtle sign that hinted he knew something nobody else did. When Mr. Grayson concluded his argument, he turned back to Judge Holloway. "Your Honor, the evidence speaks for itself. The defendant's actions were reckless, irresponsible, and damaging. He must be held accountable." Judge Holloway nodded thoughtfully, appearing satisfied with the prosecution's case. But as she glanced at Ethan, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. Her irritation resurfaced when she saw him doodling equations on his notepad instead of showing remorse. "Do you even understand the gravity of your situation, young man?" she demanded sharply. Ethan looked up, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Yes, Your Honor," he replied calmly. "More than you realize." His response puzzled her, though she quickly masked her confusion with skepticism. For now, the prosecution's arguments seemed solid, leaving Ethan's fate hanging precariously in the balance. But deep down, a small part of Judge Holloway wondered whether she and everyone else had underestimated the quiet teenager standing before them. As the session adjourned temporarily, whispers rippled through the courtroom. Was Ethan truly as guilty as he seemed? Or was there a twist waiting to unfold? Only time would tell. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial moved into its next phase, the defense. Ethan's appointed public defender, a harried-looking man named Mr. Peterson, rose to his feet. His wrinkled suit and tired eyes suggested he had seen too many cases like this one, and his lack of enthusiasm did little to inspire confidence. He shuffled through a stack of papers, clearly unprepared, and began speaking in a monotone voice that failed to capture anyone's attention. "Your Honor," Mr. Peterson started hesitantly, My client is a young man who may have made a mistake, but he certainly didn't intend to cause harm. The symbols painted on the library wall, while unusual, are not malicious in nature. His argument fell flat almost immediately. Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. Are you suggesting these equations are harmless? Because they look like vandalism to me. Before Mr. Peterson could respond, Ethan leaned forward slightly in his chair. His calm demeanor hadn't wavered throughout the proceedings, but now there was a spark of determination in his eyes. Quietly, he whispered something to his lawyer, who nodded uncertainly before turning back to the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Peterson said, clearing his throat. With your permission, my client would like to address the court directly. The request caught everyone off guard. Murmurs rippled through the gallery as people exchanged curious glances. Judge Holloway frowned, leaning back in her seat. Mr. Carter, do you wish to represent yourself? She asked, her tone laced with disbelief. Yes, Your Honor, Ethan replied firmly, standing up without hesitation. His voice carried a quiet authority that silenced the room instantly. For the first time since the trial began, all eyes were fixed solely on him. Well, Judge Holloway muttered under her breath, shaking her head slightly. She wasn't thrilled about allowing a teenager to take control of his own defense, but she couldn't deny him the right either. Very well, she said aloud, waving a hand dismissively. Proceed. Ethan stepped forward, his posture straight and confident despite his youthful appearance. Without wasting a moment, he addressed the judge and jury. Your Honor, members of the jury, I understand how my actions might seem questionable at first glance, but what appears to be graffiti is actually something far more meaningful. He paused, letting his words hang in the air before continuing. These symbols aren't random, they're mathematical equations. Specifically, they're solutions to unsolved problems that mathematicians have been working on for decades. My intention wasn't to destroy or deface property. It was to share knowledge in a way that challenges people to think differently. A few jurors exchanged puzzled looks, unsure whether to believe him or dismiss his claim as nonsense. Sensing their doubt, Ethan pressed on. Let me prove it. With permission from the judge, he approached the whiteboard mounted near the witness stand. Picking up a marker, he began explaining one of the equations step by step, translating complex concepts into simpler terms that even non-experts could grasp. As he spoke, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. What had started as skepticism slowly gave way to fascination. Even Judge Holloway found herself leaning forward, intrigued by the clarity and precision of Ethan's explanation. When he finished, there was a brief silence, a collective pause, as everyone processed what they had just witnessed. But Ethan wasn't done yet. Turning back to face the room, he added, I chose the library because it represents learning and growth. If anything, I wanted to contribute to that spirit, not diminish it. For the first time, cracks appeared in the prosecution's case. Mr. Grayson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, realizing he hadn't anticipated this turn of events. Meanwhile, Judge Holloway stared at Ethan, her earlier mockery replaced by a mix of awe and regret. It was becoming painfully clear that the boy in front of her was no ordinary defendant, and perhaps she had underestimated him far too quickly. As Ethan returned to his seat, the courtroom remained eerily silent. The tide had begun to turn, and for the first time hope flickered in Ethan's favor. The courtroom was alive with murmurs and whispers as Ethan's unexpected brilliance began to sink in. Judge Holloway, who had initially dismissed him as a typical troublemaker, now watched him with growing curiosity. The jurors exchanged glances, their earlier skepticism giving way to intrigue. Even Mr. Grayson, the prosecutor, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, sensing that the trial was slipping out of his control. But Ethan wasn't finished yet. He was just getting started. As he continued his defense, subtle hints about his true identity began to surface. During cross-examination, Ethan addressed each witness with precision, asking questions so pointed and insightful that they left both the witnesses and the audience stunned. When Mrs. Anderson, the librarian, reiterated her claim that Ethan had seemed suspicious, he calmly responded, You thought I looked nervous because I was carrying spray paint, correct? But isn't it also possible you misinterpreted my focus for suspicion? Mrs. Anderson hesitated, visibly flustered. Well, I suppose, she stammered, unsure how to respond. Ethan nodded politely before moving on, leaving her and everyone else wondering if they'd been too quick to judge him. It wasn't just his line of questioning that caught people's attention. It was the depth of his legal knowledge. At one point, when Mr. Grayson tried to object to Ethan's argument, citing a procedural rule, Ethan countered effortlessly. Actually, Your Honor, he said, turning toward Judge Holloway, under Section 521 of the Evidence Code, this testimony is admissible because it directly relates to intent. His words were calm but confident, delivered with the poise of someone who had spent years studying the law. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Holloway blinked, momentarily stunned. She glanced at Mr. Grayson, whose face flushed red as he realized Ethan was absolutely right. Objection overruled, she muttered, avoiding eye contact with either party. Ethan pressed on, dismantling the prosecution's case piece by piece. He pointed out inconsistencies in the security footage, noting that the angle made it impossible to confirm whether Ethan had actually damaged the wall or simply painted over an existing surface. He questioned the credibility of the witnesses, highlighting how their testimonies contradicted one another in minor but significant ways. Each argument was sharp, calculated, and undeniably brilliant. But it was what happened next that truly shocked the room. As Ethan referenced a landmark Supreme Court case during his closing remarks, Judge Holloway interrupted him. "How do you know about that?" she asked, her tone laced with disbelief. "That ruling is decades old and rarely cited." Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second before responding. "Because I've studied it, Your Honor. In fact, I've worked on several cases involving similar principles, just not under my real name." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Judge Holloway leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What are you saying, Mr. Carter?" Taking a deep breath, Ethan decided it was time to reveal the truth. "Your Honor, members of the jury," he began, his voice steady despite the weight of his confession, "I am not just a high school student. Over the past 2 years, I've consulted on numerous high-profile legal cases across the country, all while maintaining anonymity. My contributions have helped resolve disputes ranging from corporate litigation to intellectual property rights. What you see today is only a small part of who I am." The revelation sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Jurors whispered among themselves, some scribbling notes furiously, others staring at Ethan in disbelief. Mr. Grayson sank into his chair, defeated, as he realized he'd underestimated his opponent. Judge Holloway, meanwhile, sat frozen, her pen hovering midair above, her notepad. She had mocked Ethan earlier, dismissing him as delusional and reckless. Now she saw him for what he truly was, a genius hiding in plain sight. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of Ethan's words hung heavy in the air, forcing everyone to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the teenager standing before them. As the reality of the situation settled in, Judge Holloway cleared her throat, her voice softer than before. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you've given us much to think about." And with that, the trial took a dramatic turn. One that would change the lives of everyone involved forever. The courtroom was eerily silent as Ethan's revelation sank in. Judge Holloway, who had once mocked him, now looked at the young man with a mixture of awe and regret. The jurors exchanged glances, their earlier skepticism replaced by admiration for Ethan's intellect and composure. Even Mr. Grayson, the prosecutor, seemed to deflate under the weight of what he had just witnessed. It was clear that this trial had taken an unexpected turn, one no one could have anticipated. Ethan stood tall, his hands resting lightly on the railing of the defendant's podium. His hoodie and scuffed sneakers still marked him as an ordinary teenager, but his words carried the authority of someone far beyond his years. Sensing the shift in the room's energy, he took a deep breath and delivered his closing argument, a speech that would leave an indelible mark on everyone present. "Your Honor, members of the jury," Ethan began, his voice steady and sincere. "I understand how my actions might appear reckless or disrespectful. Spray painting equations onto a library wall isn't something most people would consider normal behavior. But I want you to ask yourselves this. When did we stop valuing creativity and intellectual exploration? When did we decide that challenging the status quo was more harmful than inspiring growth?" He paused, letting his words resonate before continuing. "What I painted wasn't vandalism. It was a message. Those equations weren't random. They were solutions to problems that mathematicians have spent decades trying to solve. By placing them where people could see them, I hope to spark curiosity, to make others think critically about the world around them. Yes, I broke rules, but sometimes breaking rules is necessary to create something new." The room remained silent, every person hanging on Ethan's every word. He spoke not just as a defendant, but as someone deeply passionate about his purpose. "This library represents knowledge," he continued, gesturing toward the building outside. "It's a place where ideas come alive, where minds are shaped and expanded. If anything, I wanted to contribute to that spirit, not destroy it." As Ethan wrapped up his argument, he turned to face Judge Holloway directly. "Your Honor, I know I made a mistake by not seeking permission to share my work in a proper way. For that, I apologize. But I also ask you to consider the bigger picture. Was my intent truly malicious? Or was it simply unconventional?" His final words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For the first time since the trial began, there was a palpable sense of hope. Hope that justice might prevail, not just for Ethan, but for the ideals he represented. Judge Holloway leaned back in, her chair visibly moved. She glanced at the jurors, who were whispering quietly among themselves, nodding along as if processing Ethan's arguments for the first time. Even Mr. Grayson appeared conflicted, his earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was softer, almost reflective. "Mr. Carter," she said, addressing him directly, "you've given us much to consider. Your actions may have been unorthodox, but your intentions seem genuine, and your intellect undeniable." She paused, looking down at her notes briefly before adding, "We'll reconvene after deliberation." As the jury filed out of the room, the gallery erupted into hushed conversations. Spectators marveled at Ethan's eloquence, some even calling him a prodigy. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to his seat, his expression calm but resolute. He knew the battle wasn't over yet, but he also knew he had planted seeds of doubt in the prosecution's case, and perhaps even inspired those around him to rethink their assumptions. For Judge Holloway, the trial had become more than just another court proceeding. It was a reminder of why she had chosen to serve justice in the first place, to seek truth, fairness, and understanding, even when the answers weren't easy to find. As she watched Ethan sit quietly, awaiting the verdict, she couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever the outcome, one thing was certain. Ethan Carter had changed the course of this trial, and maybe even the hearts of those who judged him. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the jury re-entered, their faces carefully neutral. Every eye in the room was fixed on them, waiting for the verdict that would determine Ethan Carter's fate. Judge Holloway sat upright, her expression unreadable but her posture tense. Mr. Grayson fidgeted with his pen, clearly uneasy about how the trial had unfolded. And then there was Ethan, calm and composed as if he already knew what was coming. The foreman of the jury stood, holding a slip of paper in his hand. Clearing his throat, he addressed the judge. "Your Honor, we, the jury, find the defendant, Ethan Carter, not guilty." A wave of shock rippled through the room. For a moment, no one moved or spoke. Then applause broke out from the gallery, echoing off the walls of the courthouse. Spectators who had initially doubted Ethan now cheered him on, some even rising to their feet. Reporters scrambled to jot down notes, eager to capture the historic moment. Ethan, however, remained still, his expression unchanged. He simply nodded, slightly, acknowledging the verdict without any hint of triumph. Judge Holloway raised her hand to quiet the room, her gavel tapping softly against the desk. Once silence returned, she turned to Ethan. Her voice carried a mix of authority and admiration as she spoke. "Mr. Carter," she began, "while this court has found you not guilty, I must remind you that your methods were unconventional, to say the least. Public property is meant to be respected, and while your intentions may have been noble, they crossed certain boundaries." Ethan nodded respectfully. "I understand, Your Honor. I take full responsibility for my actions and will ensure that such incidents don't happen again." His humility struck a chord with Judge Holloway. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze softening. "That being said, Mr. Carter, I cannot ignore the fact that you've brought something extraordinary to this courtroom today. Not just your intellect, but also your passion for knowledge and innovation. You've reminded us all why questioning norms can sometimes lead to progress." Her words resonated deeply with those present. Even Mr. Grayson, who had spent much of the trial trying to discredit Ethan, looked thoughtful. It was clear that the teenager had left an indelible mark on everyone involved. As the formalities concluded, and Ethan prepared to leave the courthouse, reporters swarmed him outside, eager to learn more about the boy genius who had outsmarted seasoned lawyers and charmed a skeptical judge. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and questions flew at him from every direction. Yet Ethan handled it all with grace, offering brief but insightful answers. When asked about his plans for the future, he smiled faintly and said, "I hope to use my skills to inspire others, especially young people, to think differently and challenge themselves." Inside the courthouse, Judge Holloway watched the scene unfold through a window. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not because she had played a role in the verdict, but because she had witnessed something truly remarkable. The trial had forced her to confront her own biases and assumptions, reminding her that justice isn't always black and white. Sometimes, it requires looking beyond appearances to uncover the truth. Later that evening, as Ethan walked home under the fading light of dusk, he reflected on the day's events. Though relieved by the outcome, he knew this was only the beginning. His journey wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about making a difference. And as he disappeared into the quiet streets of his small town, whispers of his brilliance continued to spread, sparking conversations about creativity, curiosity, and the power of unconventional thinking. For Judge Holloway, the experience lingered long after the courtroom emptied. She realized that Ethan had taught her something invaluable, that fairness means giving everyone a chance to tell their story, no matter how unlikely it may seem. As she closed the case file, marked State vs. Carter, she felt a renewed commitment to her role, not just as a judge but as someone tasked with seeking truth and understanding in a complex world. Justice had been served, but its impact would extend far beyond the confines of the courthouse. In the weeks following the trial, Ethan Carter's name became synonymous with brilliance and resilience. News outlets dubbed him the boy barrister, and stories about his courtroom triumphs spread like wildfire. Social media was flooded with memes, fan art, and hashtags celebrating the teenager who had outsmarted seasoned lawyers and won over a skeptical judge. Yet despite the sudden fame, Ethan remained grounded. He declined lucrative offers from prestigious law firms eager to recruit him, choosing instead to focus on something closer to his heart, mentoring young people. Ethan believed that intelligence wasn't meant to be hoarded. It was meant to inspire others. With the support of local educators and community leaders, he launched a program called Think Beyond, aimed at encouraging students to explore their passions in unconventional ways. Through workshops, online courses, and public speaking engagements, Ethan shared his love for mathematics, law, and critical thinking. His message was simple yet powerful. Don't be afraid to challenge norms. Sometimes the best ideas come from breaking rules. Meanwhile, Judge Margaret Holloway underwent her own transformation. The trial had shaken her deeply, forcing her to confront her biases and reevaluate how she approached cases. Inspired by Ethan's courage and conviction, she began advocating for reforms within the judicial system. She pushed for programs that focused on rehabilitation rather than punishment, especially for young offenders whose mistakes often stemmed from curiosity or misunderstanding. Her efforts earned her respect not only from colleagues, but also from the community she served. Though their paths diverged after the trial, Fate brought Ethan and Judge Holloway together once again years later. By then, Ethan had grown into a renowned attorney known for taking on complex cases involving intellectual property rights and civil liberties. His innovative strategies and unwavering dedication made headlines worldwide. When a groundbreaking case landed in the same courthouse where his journey had begun, Ethan found himself standing before none other than Judge Holloway, now presiding over the trial. As they shook hands before proceedings began, both silently acknowledged the journey that had brought them here. Judge Holloway smiled warmly, her earlier skepticism replaced by admiration. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice tinged with pride. "It seems life has come full circle." Ethan returned the smile, his eyes reflecting gratitude. "Thank you, Your Honor, for everything." The trial that followed showcased Ethan's brilliance once again, but this time there were no surprises, only mutual respect between two individuals who had grown profoundly since their first encounter. The case concluded with a verdict that set a new precedent, further solidifying Ethan's reputation as a legal trailblazer. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed Ethan, eager to hear his thoughts on the outcome. But when asked about his greatest achievement, he didn't hesitate. "It's not winning cases or gaining recognition," he said, his tone calm yet passionate. "It's knowing that I've inspired others to believe in themselves, to think differently and strive for change." Judge Holloway watched from afar, her heart swelling with pride. She realized that Ethan's impact extended far beyond the courtroom. He had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that even the unlikeliest individuals could spark meaningful change. Years later, when Judge Holloway retired, she penned a memoir reflecting on her career. In its final chapter, she wrote about Ethan, calling him the boy who changed my perspective. She ended with these words: "Justice isn't just about laws, it's about understanding. And sometimes understanding begins with listening to those we least expect." As for Ethan, he continued to fight for causes greater than himself, leaving behind a legacy of innovation, compassion, and courage. Together, he and Judge Holloway had proven that redemption, growth, and justice weren't confined to courtrooms. They lived in the hearts of those willing to embrace them.